Welcome. This is the second in our series of women in landscape architecture. Um, and here we have Diana Armstrong Bell with us. Um, I think at one time, most people came into landscape architecture as a second degree. And Diana is one of those. And she started firstly studying art. And I think that has endured throughout her work. The strong influence of art. So she studied at Gloucester College of Art and Design and set up her own practice in 1984. And she has gone on to win many international competitions and awards for her work, which has been across the Middle East, in Europe and the UK. Um, She's taught at Greenwich University and at the Inchbald School of Design and lectured widely elsewhere and been part of judging panels. And recently, she's written a book called Sculpting the Land. And I think we're really looking forward, Diana, to hearing more about you and your work. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, well, thank you, Folar and Annabelle, for inviting me to give this talk. And I feel very honoured to be in the sort of lineup along with Brenda Colvin and Susan Jellicoe. It's an honour. Thank you. So the talk is Sculpting the Land, Landscape Design Influenced by Abstract Art. This is the title of the book that I wrote in 2019, and that's the book there. It was published by Unicorn and launched at the Royal Academy London, and I'm going to talk today about some of the projects in the book. Most of them are large-scale public landscapes in the urban realm, with many on contaminated brownfield sites, and many have won international design competitions, and all are hand-drawn in pencil, ink, collage, and watercolour. You won't see a CAD drawing in this lineup. Just to say what my early influences were or who they were, is first of all, when I was a young landscape architect, it was definitely Geoffrey Jellicoe. And the reason was that he considered that the practice of landscape architecture was a fine art. And that's what I believe too. His designs were inspired by the arts, and his inky drawings are just beautiful. And they're held actually at the University of Reading, and join Folar and you can go and look at them and see them. And also he never gave up, and I don't believe in ever giving up either. Fast forward on to the early 1980s, and I went to interview Pietro Porcinai for the Oxford Companion to Gardens, actually, the little section on modern Italy that I did. And Pietro Porcinai was the landscape architect for Carlo Scarpa at the Brion Cemetery, San Vito, Italy. And I then vowed, after I'd seen these photographs that were absolutely wonderful, that I had to visit it. And when I did, and what I wrote in my book was that the design is a journey of remembrances, an artistic and poetic response capturing feelings in the built form. Anything that captures emotion and feeling in a built form, in my view, that's art. And this site was a landscape, it was a building, and it was also art. And it gave me strength from the art background, that I came from, that I was going to continue in this realm. The next major influence for me throughout my entire career, from when I started my practice in 1984, was Zaha Hadid. Zaha reimagines the organization of space, and she famously said, there are 360 degrees, why use only two of them, i.e. the right angle? And I also agree with that too. The first time I ever saw her work was this project, the Peak Hong Kong. It was a competition entry. These are all hand-drawn in ink, by the way. They're just beautiful drawings. And this is a hotel, but it had all the planes, all the stories, they slide and shift. And she called it a kind of suprematist geology. because she was influenced by the suprematist artist Malevich. And then top right, we have Vitra Fire Station. It's a functioning fire station, but it's also a sculpture. Kazimir Malevich has also influenced me. I sort of found him in parallel to Zaha. I mean, I didn't find him because of Zaha. I was looking at a certain point in my career for abstract art, which I could actually relate to the design and organization of space. And what Malevich's suprematist paintings do is explore the spatial relationships between elements. And if we look at this painting here, the red square, the black square, and that black square, I see those elements as holding the space between them. So they sort of frame the space. And that's in fact what we do with landscape. We are shifting and moving elements. This red line comes up from the side. It's like almost like a sort of dynamic way through. I know an Italian piazza that looks well exactly like this. And I have used these kind of modes of sort of shifting space in my work. It's not about copying these works, it's about learning from them. And this one is about a path, and these lines represent to me, I mean, this is my interpretation, because they're not a path, they're an abstract art, but I see movement along a journey when I look at that art. Then we get to Moholy Nagy. He's also in this, he's a Russian artist of the same period as Malevich and El Lissitzky, who's this one. This is a beautiful, beautiful painting that's orthogonal. So it's not that one has to always use odd lines, you don't. But what this painting does for me is show me the shifting planes, the hierarchy of the different elements and how they move and shift with one another. The fact that these lines go zooming off the edge of the page is also relevant because it gives a dynamism to the work. And I bring this sort of thing into my paving layouts. And I've actually used this work numbers of times, or drawn from it, should I say. El Lissitzky was an architect and an artist, and he's worth a look. I won't say too much more about that. I'll move on. So the influences, I mean, as a landscape architect, it's always got to be the land. I mean, I draw on the sculptural and painterly qualities of a landscape. And I sort of look at landscapes like this, and I'm looking at the line and the form and the way it's composed, almost as though it was a work of art. I mean, as well as it being a biodiverse landscape and all the rest of it. But, you know, there's many ways to look at a place. And I've noted, spend time observing, listening, and gathering clues about a landscape. And that's what I would urge every one of us to do. Every time you have a site, just spend a lot of time in it. You know, watch how the sun moves, what it does at different times, how it feels. And then here we have on the right, I mean, this is freeze frame. It looks like a piece of modern art. In fact, it's a drainage ditch and 2 earth bunds. But when you look at it like that, it takes on a different form. And that's one of the many kind of wonderful historic interventions. It's almost like a brooch studied onto the landscape. And I've said here that the patterns of the past appear as abstract interventions scattered across the landscape. And they're a memory bank of human and animal happenings etched onto the surface of the land. And I think you can draw on these kind of things in your new landscapes. So I must say that these images, the ones I've just shown you, are by Bill Blake Kite Aerial Photography. He goes out with a kite, a material kite with a bit of string. He clips his camera to the kite and sends it up in the sky and takes these amazing photographs. He has an artist's eye. Trees. Trees and landform are the 2 main ingredients on the landscape architect's palette. Trees last for centuries, landform for millennia. And I love ancient trees, and they can be living sculptures. They date our landscapes. They connect us with our past. And I've got the Boboli Gardens here. This is a walk around the Boboli Gardens, Florence. every kind of way that you can use trees to edge space, to focus views, to create tunnels, to create is done in this garden. And although this is a historic scheme, we can take these lessons into contemporary schemes. And I feel trees in cities are green architecture. And although we've gone much more sort of loose and native recently, we mustn't forget these principles, because the two things can work side by side, and they should really. Which takes me to the National Gallery, London. This is the first of the jobs I'm going to show you. This is a story about trees. I was really lucky to work with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. This is about 1988, probably to 90. And it's a very simple space. It's the kind of little space that slides between the old gallery and the new, and it links Trafalgar Square with Leicester Square. So the paving here is just simply a carpet of granite and York stone. It's orthogonal, it respects the buildings, it's simple and classical. The trees, however, are close planted. They're plain trees to mirror the scale of the adjacent buildings, and they came cube-headed and rather large. When we put them in, we put them in one Sunday with a crane. At the beginning of the day, when there were no trees in this site, quite honestly, it was just a nowhere place, a little bit of land left over with some nice paving. When the trees went in, because they made a canopy and they made that square feel like a square, it suddenly became a place you wanted to wander in. And as those all day long, people wander through. It's withstood the test of time, this scheme. It's quite old now. And I've noted down here, started the big rethink. Not because of this scheme, because it was very exciting actually working on this, but all through, I suppose, the late 80s to 90, I was thinking, why can't I find an opportunity to do some sort of cutting edge modern design? I wasn't getting that opportunity. And to be honest, there really wasn't any in landscape architecture in the UK at that time. We were all looking for it and it wasn't there. I went to France, I went to Barcelona, and I looked at the little squares in Barcelona that were sort of peppered across the city. And I came back inspired, and I determined at that point that I would enter competitions as a means of getting the opportunity just to do something different and more contemporary. I entered my first competition. I can't show you everything, but I'm not showing you that one, in France, at Lac de Senard in Paris, just south of Paris. It was a 130-hectare park. It was a land sculpture. It was using a huge quantity of earth to make a park. And I won. I was the sort of outside runner, really, the wild card, but working with Arup Engineering, who've been with me actually on all, well, not all, but most of these projects and almost all my competitions. So thank you, Arup, actually. And this is, a few years later, I was invited to do Parco Francoverga Milan, which was just wonderful. As I'm very, I love Italy, and I've been going back and forth to Italy for years and years. So this project, I'm going to tell you quite a lot about this project. It's going to take up more time, and the others are small. Well, they're not smaller, but I'm going to tell you all how I go about it. In this one, I tell you how I go about it. This was the site as it was before the park was built. It was actually covered with petrochemical works, and it was heavily contaminated. It's a 23-hectare site in North Milan, in a very impoverished area called Quarto Ojaro. It's not the trendy bit of Milan, this. And when that was removed, I didn't actually see those. There was nothing there. There was no vegetation. There was nothing. It was just a spoiled landscape. The local authority came up with this drawing. They wanted a park here with new housing here and the old flats there, and there are the old flats. And this housing was to pay for the park. And that's when I first visited it. Still, some of these things are left, but that was swept away, not by us, but by the cleaning process. And the old flats are there. But curiously, at the side of the site, there's this funny little street. It's like a little remnant of a sort of almost a Tuscan village. And got this idea into my head that there were fragments of a former time that were sort of, I could find on the site. And hanging over the garden, onto this grey and despoiled site, as it was when I found it, was this tree here, this lone flowering cherry tree. And I noted all these things, the fragments, the cherry tree, to use in the design. And then another thing, not only is your site important, but the context. What, where does it sit? What does it relate to? South of Milan, the landscape, the farmed landscape, has paddy fields. Lombardy is flat and quite wet in places. And you see these wet fields and these earth buns slicing between, and then these grids of poplar trees that are just scattered loosely about. It's absolutely fantastic. It's an arresting sight. We drove our car onto here. And then when we started looking around, I wanted to really get to grips with Milan, the city, to get the feel of it. And I discovered that Milan had been a city and a port. It was once encircled with canals in the 16th and 17th century. In 1920s, they covered most of them over and made them into roads. But this one, the Naviglio Grande, is left, which shows you that Milan once actually slightly resembled Venice, and nowadays it's a dry and busy city. So this idea of gathering fragments of a site's history as a source of inspiration for the design took hold. And I would say that that's my bedrock for every project I do. I find out as much as I can about the place, its context, its history, and the design therefore grows out of that. When we'd done all our site analysis and survey, I sort of invented these little abstracty drawings to show the client all the various things we'd looked at. We had reams of information by that point. And so by this point, we'd established where the pedestrian accesses should be, the visual axes, the site history. It had a dry river on it. It once was a wet site. Milan as a city and port, the geology throwing up springs, wet Lombardy, and all of these things and much more, no vegetation because there wasn't any left on the site. All of this gets studied and put together into a design strategy. And that positions the entrances, the main desire lines, and in this particular design, these piazzas and an amphitheatre, which I wanted to do. And then all of that, you end up with this, which is the master plan. This is an A0 drawing, hand-drawn and watercoloured, and it was exhibited in the Royal Academy in 2019 in the summer exhibition in the architecture room. I can't say I've ever been prouder than that, when that was there, it was just wonderful. And this design, I would say that the influence of Malevich, to go back to the sort of beginning, to our art conversation, art comes in there. I mean, art comes in somewhere up here, whereas all the other stuff is happening on, down here in a way. I always think of it like that because art is what sort of is the way I think. And at the point where you've got to a design strategy, a design can still at that point become any shape. And the art actually, obviously, you see, I think, hope you can, the influence of sort of my Malevichian lines and so on. So the way I shape it definitely shows an influence of those paintings. To briefly discuss the design, from running across the site is a raised earth walkway, remembering those ones in the Lombardy landscape. Falling from the banks of that raised earth walkway are 4 canals that go to full length of the site. There's a piazza at each end and one up there, and it's to tempt people into the park. A sculptural play area there, and these are grids of poplar trees loosely scattered, and this is an earth amphitheatre with a lake. That's positioned there as a designed view, amongst other things, because the road here is on stilts, it's up high, and you get this wonderful view over the site. So I wanted you to have this amazing view, as well as it linking to the new University of Bovisa. And we have an ecological edge all the way around. And that's how it looks at the bottom half of the site. These little red things I forgot to say, they're what I call my fragment gardens. And those are in memory of that lone flowering cherry tree. And it's almost as though I've taken a handful of blossom off one of those trees and I've cast it down onto the ground. And where they fall, we've made an intensely detailed, herbaceous, tiny garden with seats in total contrast to the rest, which is very sculpted and green. So this is a very early photograph showing at the top, is looking at the plan top left where the ball games areas, and this is the raised earth walkway. All the trees are quite small, except the poplar trees, which are leafy. So we move on, but that's what that was, and this is the ecological evidence, very frail at this point. It's developed since then. This is the raised earth walkway. It is quite a dramatic feature, and when you're up there, you just sort of feel like king of the castle. All paths slope up to it. There are no steps in this park. It is all accessible, and because there's lots of slopes and tilts, you get tilting plains of earth. Lombardy is flat, so I think sculpting in this situation is kind of modest. It's respectful of this landscape, and here's the canal falling out of the banks. And that's it, built and finished. The dog is up on the raised earth walkway. This lady, the owner of the dog, is toiling up one of those paths, and the snow is filled in, all the earth changes in level. And there's one of the canals. It's quite a nice sight. This is the same view we had before, but some years later. So now we're seeing, landscape is a slow process, and we're seeing now the earth, the raised earth walkway with its avenue now looking beefy, and it's all beginning to reinforce those lines, the strong lines of the master plan are now reading in actuality. These poplars are now huge because they go so quickly, and you can see the paths coming out of the ground and the effect they have in the evening sun. That's one of the grids of poplars really doing their job. And then we go on to Piazza Nord. This is, I'm just showing you one piazza. Each of the three piazza have the same ingredients: a concrete cube kiosk, a water feature, a pergola, and usually poplar and cherry tree. In this one, we have a little knee-high wall with a mini canal in it. And this is the plan. It is actually really an A1 ink drawing, all hand drawn in ink. With some, I'd say, collaged elements. We do stick on some pieces that we've made ourselves in the office. This is the concrete cube kiosk designed by my wonderful Italian architects that I commissioned, and there's a water feature jutting out from the walls there, and the pergola. The mini canal that goes along there with poplar trees there, and a concrete wall. Each one is a step. I like you to sit on walls. I don't tend to put seats all over the place. So each one of these walls is also a seat. And then these are old cherry trees. And then because it's all gone up, the earth banks come down sharply all around it and enclose it. And that's it. Built the concrete cube kiosk there, the pergola, and the mini canal. And the thing to say there, that I put the dog in simply because it's kind of pleasing and amusing to me, because I spent a day there a few years ago watching how people use the park, and I noticed that in mid-afternoon a group of older men come with their small dogs, and each one holding a ball, and they throw the ball along there, and the dog leaps in and then runs around back to its owner, and they were all doing it time and time again, and they were just loving it. This is a more recent view still. Now walking back from the other way, we were always looking that way before. Now we're into the park, Piazza Nord here, and this is all the new housing and flats, and the raised earth walkway is really doing its job of a strong line linking into the new development. The canal's running off here. And then taking another step back still, we come to the other piazza at the other end of the raised earth walkway, and that's up at the high level. So it's kind of steeply banked down, and you look down to the Piazza Nord and the sculptural play area. The play area is, it was conceived as a sort of land sculpture and not to have any play equipment in it. And I mapped out some shapes first in plasticine. This is just the sort of thing I do in the office, and that to get the ideas of landform. And then that's how it became. It had to widen out to allow for safety and so on. This is a mini ziggurat, and each one of these is a low step wall, so it's stepped up to the, so everywhere the children can jump up and down. This is a 1 o'clock club designed by my architect, and this is a little apple orchard. This is a slope up to a sort of platform here, and this is something I called the Kaleidoscope Hill, and a water splash there. And that's the Kaleidoscope Hill. It's a little child-sized room with a door in either end and a glass roof, a glass sort of window, really. So when the sun comes in, it casts light, and the inside is lined with mirror mosaic, and it's like a kind of magical inside. And this is the mini ziggurat, Kaleidoscope Hill. That's part of the design for the mosaic. And this is the water splash. Milan Council came along and put these murals by TV Boy on after we'd done it. But I think they had actually I do quite like them as a matter of fact. And this is the real honeypot. This area, this sculptural play area is probably the most intensely used area of the entire park. It's full of people all the time, and in the summer they come and sit there all day long. On that day when I met the old men and the dogs and everything, I was basing myself here, sort of on this wall with these people, and this little boy here spoke some English and I speak Italian, so we chatted away and they shared their drinks with me and so on. And I got to know them quite well, and here where they lived in the old flats, and they weren't probably Italian. They were probably from quite challenging backgrounds, to be honest. And when I was about to leave, I said to the little boy, well, I actually designed the park. And he and all the other little boys, like, they clumped around me. And it was the most moving moment almost ever, really, because he said, we love you, we love you, we love your park. He said, we can't afford to go to the beach. This is our beach. We come here every day. Thank you, thank you. And I said, the people make the park their own. So at the end of the day, that really is, as landscape architects, the most important thing with everything we do. It's got to work for people, the people that we're doing it for. And that's why we do it. So moving on now to another competition, actually, which I won, which is the Landscape Master Plan for the University of Lincoln. This is a completely different thing. On my way to the first meeting on site, we were asked up to look at the site by the client. And when you got on the train to go to Lincoln from London, you have to change onto this tiny little train which tugs through the fens on a raised earth embankment. And this was literally the views I was seeing. I got that off Google Earth, obviously, but that is what it looks like, the fens. It's like a Monjon landscape. It's incredible. And out of my train window, this is another Bill Blake wonderful photograph, but I was seeing this swady soil, cut by these silvery dikes and these frail lines of trees. It was absolutely amazing. And all the ideas for the competition came. I had a notebook full of ideas before I even got there, actually. And then, rather oddly, the train comes right into the site. This is the site here, actually, and the train slides into the site. And I realized that that's what it was doing, because I looked at the plans, of course. And where's this thing gone? There we are. If you look from the train across there, or when you're standing there, that is the view you see. This is one of the most painted and iconic views of the British Isles, really. The church, the cathedral and the castle are situated on this sort of lump of limestone, which is at the end of a limestone escarpment, which goes right the way up Lincolnshire. And, our site, has this amazing view. The competition was about doing a landscape master plan for a possible arrangement of buildings which were laid out by Rick Mather architects. And I'll be quick with this one, but I really did base my whole thing on these iconic views. That I think that was the linchpin really of the way the landscape was arranged. And when I walked outside the site, quite a way down here, I could still see through this gap between buildings, this window. I could see this amazing view. So I sort of freeze framed it really in this line here. Because they're making a new entrance here, I've made another of these kind of iconic views to this water feature and a sculpture. This is an existing balancing lake, but I've reshaped it, made it a bit bigger. There were lots of other aspects of this design, but I'm only going to show you that bit, which is that. It's the central green space. That was our competition drawing. And so I, haven't made it quite orthogonal, needless to say, this water feature. And this is the iconic view to the cathedral, marching across the water on a bridge, and the secondary axis is there with a possible sculpture. These are only ideas. Don't forget this how it necessarily is, with a Corten sculpture as the vista. And there was an art centre here, so we made a big landform which you could sit on, and we had a limestone gabion wall reminiscent of that limestone in the Lincolnshire landscape. So the design is an abstraction of all the elements that I'd found in the landscape, and that's again largely what I do throughout. So the next one, we're on to Electra Park, West Ham, London, and this was this is not a competition. This is this was a commission to do a business park, and the site is quite big actually, going all the way down there, and it was West Ham Power Station. So when it was removed, it was heavily contaminated yet again. And not only that, the whole site was covered with an actual forest of Japanese knotweed, which I had to come up with, schedule of getting rid of it, which all that had to be cleared before we could do a thing. And the brief was for a contemporary piazza. Well, I put contemporary for a piazza really, as on the river's edge, and a river walk, which was going to be part of a jigsaw of green spaces connecting the Thames down here with the Lee Valley Regional Park. Eventually, this footpath goes to the Olympic Games as well. And that's how it is. It's a very simple design, and it's, sorry, I'm losing my little arrow. There we are. This line, which is a low gabion wall, marks an existing dock wall, which we only found when we sort of cleared the site. And then we realised that actually this had been a dock, and this seems to happen, I seem to always end up with these odd situations. So I marked this line, and it's at an odd angle to the building, which of course I felt rather pleasing. And what I did, because we can't plant into here, because it's actually like a table under which is water, so it allowed for a planter, a sort of raised planter. These are Descampsia grasses, native grasses, to give the impression of a sort of riverine landscape. In this instance, I've used seats, by the way, these Barcelona seats, because I don't expect them to sit on the gateway. The blue line is there as a sort of representing the former presence of water, and it's recycled glass held in epoxy resin. And the third element, and as I said, it's just 3 lines really, is this enormously long seat, which I had made in also grill. And so there's this kind of strong element, and I think it just shows it wasn't high budget, this, and it's just about doing something simple and interesting sometimes. And these huge galvanized planters are also, we had those made for the birch trees. So that's it. That was taken earlier. The birch trees aren't there yet. It's quite a bright picture, this, that show these are Prunus cerula trees, and we had other I did have this red stripe running here, but I have to say that didn't survive. But this is all these silver sheds, and this it was a nice thing. And off the picture here, we have native planting going along the riverbank. Not so native. Duke of York Square, Kings Road, Chelsea. This is a competition entry. I was not a win. I was in the final four for this. So this is one of the this is the competition drawings actually. I mean, I've known the Kings Road since I was sort of 18 really, and it's been the home of going to Chelsea Art College was I mean I didn't go there as a student, but I visited it then, and that's what made me want to do sculpture, as a matter of fact. But I've got a long association with the Kings Road, and all the artistic and movements, and looking at the punks and seeing the fashion that was there in the old days. It was a fairly important place for me. So this was a very interesting competition, and I felt that it was somewhere that could do with something contemporary. So the client wanted the design to draw you into the inner courtyard. The King's Road's there, and if you know this site, it has this inner courtyard which you don't necessarily see. So my design sort of moved you towards that. I also suggested this glass cube cafe, which is like that, as a central focus. And this is the landscape area, the Saatchi Gallery there. And that's the design plan, again hand drawn with certain collared elements. This line here is a line of light set in the paving and flush with it, and all the rest are either flush with the paving lines, these lines, or they come out of the ground for you to sit on. Some sloping, some just low walls. Some are coming out at an angle. And if you notice that all these lines here are kind of moving you visually, they're visually sort of directing you towards this inner courtyard. Whereas these lines are all moving you towards this area where there's Partridge's Delicatessen and Cafe, which is kind of hidden. And so I wanted you to be taken in both directions visually by the paving lines and the seats rising out of the ground also. There's a water splash here. And I think that's it really. But I think I want to say every single line in my designs, particularly, of this kind of design, has a story. I can tell you really why every line is there. It's either a vision or a movement line, but they're composed obviously in a kind of Malavichian way, but they have a job and a function. So it's, someone once said pattern making. I thought, no. And I want to make the point that none of this is simply artful pattern making. It's actually doing something. So that's important to know. So this is our sketch of how we thought it might look. It's a little bit bright, this drawing, but because it's not blue, but it shows this sort of movement through to the inner courtyard, and that's the water feature there. And I started with art, and I'm ending with art. The Canary Wharf group asked me if I would do a temporary landscape, or two options actually for temporary landscape, in this very curious site in Canary Wharf. Their offices, their Canary Wharf Tower is right off here. And they were looking down at this, it's quite large, this, as you can see by the scale of the people, a huge basement of what would be a tower block. A tower block was going to rise out of this hole in the ground, but it was just lined in concrete with these car ramps that went down into it. And it was a really odd space. So they said, can you do something with it, landscape it somehow temporarily to make it look better, until the new tower block gets built, which was some years later. So I looked into the history, of course, of this site, and learnt that it had been a dock and the water used to come into this space. And I got the idea of doing something that represented flowing water and movement and change. And I also felt that because you were seeing this site from all the way round, people walked round it, they could view it from all sides. It was important that whatever you did in there sort of worked from every view, not just from up here. And so how I came up with that design was like this. I made two identical models first. These are just on in the studio, me making them with, you know, with foam board, not properly made models, you know. But they are to scale, and I made two absolutely the same. And I decided that because it was such a peculiar space, really, to get one's head around, I would have to actually make it into the model before doing any drawings at all. So I made these shapes. I made lots of shapes, actually, and I kept fitting them in and moving them around. And they're just pinned with pins. And when I thought they were right, I would pin them. And eventually I arrived at a composition, and I could hold the model up and I could look all the way around as though I were walking around the space. So when I got to the point that I was happy with it, we drew it, and only then. And then you can see, firstly, how enormous these are, this stainless steel fins, and how it changes the vista as you go around. So it's quite sort of interesting. And then the second one is, it's got two stainless steel fins and two fabric coloured fins, and one, it's just a framework studded with little LED lights. The ground plane on both of them is crushed CDs, just loose, because it didn't have to last very long. I mean, you do it normally, but it's like a show garden in a way. And then some of my famous recycled glass in epoxy resin, just making lines on the ground. So this was the second one, and this is it in model form. So it's a quite vibrant sort of thing. This one, it's quite it's much more mobile. In fact, we were asked to price up the simple one, but I think, and this is a bit more complicated with its fabric coloured fins, but it's very interesting. I quite like this one, actually, and you can see in the drawings here that it's got a lot of movement in it. When I presented this to the client, because I was sort of commissioned to do it, they said, but this is art. You've done art. And I said, well, yes, I have. It's art. Yes, we can do that, landscape architect. And they said, well, if it's art, we should be asking artists to do it, don't you think? So they then said, well, I think we'll have a competition. I mean, you can put what you've done, which is this, in to the competition. But so they asked the Turner Prize winning architects for that year to compete against me. And they were given the same brief, and they all came back after they'd given them, I don't know, months to do it or something. And they came back, and we all had pin-up day. And at the end of it, I won anyway. And I have to say, I think it was only, I mean, they came up with some fantastic things, but as landscape architects, we are used to working with a site and a space, and they weren't really. So it was extraordinary, and that's why I wanted to end with this one, because I see no reason why we as landscape architects can't be doing pure art. So this is the last slide. So thank you very, very much for listening, and thank you.
Oh, Diana, that was fabulous. Really fantastic. Very polished, insightful, how you work, what inspires you. Just, I don't know, just I'm so pleased actually you teach and you lecture. You're going to carry on working
Yes.
to the end of time. So brilliant, brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Helen to deal with questions.
Thank you very much, Annabelle, and may I add my thanks to you, Diana. That was absolutely stunning, and all the questions I've come up with partially answered, but I will kick things off, if I may, with questions of my own. Absolutely amazing, your artistic input, sculptural input to the sites. Do you find it difficult to find technicians or appropriate people to fabricate the materials, the shapes and the sculptures that you were creating?
Yeah, yes. Yes is the answer. I mean, I mean, on that sculpture one, I was lucky because we got the engineer, and we had Willoughby Landscape actually, and a very good engineer, and Willoughby knew a fabricator, so they were fabulous. So we were able to, you know, cost it with them and put that together. So that was good. But in Milan, where we have a lot of unusual things, I mean, the detailing up of it was, well, challenging to say. I had Arab's input quite a lot. I mean, on one of the pergolas, which has the fins on the top of the pergola, are all set at a different angle. It's like it's like a spine that when you're bending and your spine moves. And so we to do that, I had the design engineer at Arab's, this wonderful Gabriele, who came up with all these sketches and details. Without him, you know, I think as landscape architects, we mustn't be limited by our, that's what I say to them, by our lack of technical ability. We must always go for whatever we would like to do, and you know, you just will find someone to do it.
Or you will, Diana. I'm not sure about the rest of us, but there's some very very nice messages coming in. Thanks for a lovely, inspiring show. Beautiful hand drawings, very meaningful moments, those boys in the park. A1 ink drawings for us all to aim for. Brodie's asking, have you considered or been inspired by other art movements in your landscape design?
Well, I mean, Kandinsky, well, it's all actually, I have to say, it's all rather from that period. Kandinsky is definitely in there. Yeah, in fact, I have it sitting across, I can see it from now. I have my book cover, which has got the Milan Park part of it on the cover, and it's standing next to a vase which has got a Kandinsky painting on it. And when I put them together, I realized that Kandinsky had inspired me a lot, but subliminally, for that park. And I think all the art that you look at, because I go to art galleries all the time. I go to the Royal Academy. I see all the main shows. So it's not. I suppose the ones I've talked about are the ones that I can directly relate to the, you know, the shape of spaces and the movement of objects within space, which is basically what designers do. But for planting design, certainly, I mean, some of the sort of more impressionistic works do come into play, that are more colourful, less, you know, brutal than the ones I showed, probably.
Thank you, Diana. Rupi, you say fantastic thoughts. Thanks for sharing your fabulous drawings. Design programs seem to take over the artistic experience we all once had. Do you want to unmute and just explain that? Because I might misinterpret that question, or Diana may understand it better than I do. Are you there, Rupi?
Hi, Helen. Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
Thank you.
Are you being critical of design programs?
No, I tend to use them all the time, actually. AutoCAD, Photoshop.
Oh, you mean that kind of?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to put all of that in there, but there's a whole list of them, isn't there? There's Revit, and you can go on with the design programs and packages we use these days. Just my own experience, really, over the years, I noticed myself becoming more attached to creating and designing straight away onto AutoCAD. And it took, when I actually worked for Colvin and Moggridge, it was going back there I started to then feel the pencil again in my hands and start drawing again and exploring different design ideas, being fluid with the ideas. I just feel, I think what do you think, Diana? I mean,
well,
do
I
you think
mean,
we are moving away so much from that sort of raw exploring, designing with pencils?
I mean, we obviously we have to do working drawings these days in CAD, or I mean, I don't personally because I don't do it, but they have to be done in CAD. The whole of Milan was done in CAD and in Italian and to Italian standard. But that to me is the nuts and bolts of it. All the design ideas are drawn by hand by me in pencil. I mean, and quite roughly before they get to that inky stage. And I honestly think that drawing it's more creative. It's quicker. You can, it's the hand-eye pencil. I think if you go straight to CAD, you will deaden your work. And I fear when I see, sorry to say this, but when I go into some offices and I don't see a shred of paper or pencil anywhere, I think, what's going to become of us all? Because I think ideas come quickly when you're drawing them and jotting them. It's not about the beautiful drawings, it's about ideas getting onto paper quickly and not being wooden as they are made by CAD. Sorry.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, once I was back, I almost forgot. I thought, wow, I used to do this.
Yes.
And for some reason, through my experiences, or the work I was doing at the time, I thought, how did I forget? How did I forget I used to do this? And it was lovely just doing, conceptual designs again and working with the landform and so forth. It is a beautiful thing. And I do fear in universities now, I hope it's picked up again through presentations like yours.
But I mean, another thing is that, I went into a display of landscape architects' work, and I looked at them. Not only do they all look the same at a glance, this was, but they were all the same colour, that photoshoppy pale sagey green, and they all there was just and all the 3D images looked the same, and I just thought, I think it's stamping out originality. I really do. So I would urge everyone to get back to picking up the pencil.
Absolutely.
And it isn't about being a great artist. It really isn't. It's about ideas.
Thank you.
Brodie says, Kandinsky liked music. Are we going to see some of that in your future designs?
Well, no, I'm absolutely not musical. I wish I was. I know Calatrava, used music in his designs, and so do some other designers. But sadly, I think I'm missing brain cells in that department. I can't relate music to design of places. I just can't do it. I don't know.
Well, you can obviously relate other people, because Sue says, went to college with Diana. She inspired me in a love of live ballet and opera. Fantastic, inspiring talk. So you've obviously got some impact on the musical front. Angela says, bring back hand drawings. How refreshing after many years of reviewing CAD drawings. We must inspire students to keep sketching. You can see individuals' drawing style, texture. This is from Helen Brown. Texture, line, quality, pressure tone, which is so difficult in CAD. I think that's very true. Can I ask another question, please? You showed us the Ziggurat in Parco Franco, I think.
Yes.
An illustration of your attitude to design for play for children, or
yes.
Grown-ups who are still children. What else? What are your attitudes to designing children's play and integrating it into the bigger picture?
When I was a small child, I found play areas totally intimidating, and I played in the country. Well, I was lucky enough to live in a village or various villages in the countryside, or with bales of hay, or with not with bits of made equipment. And I know it's different in cities, but I honestly think that children should be in an environment where just everything's kind of interesting and stimulating. And that doesn't always mean bits of play equipment. There are also bits of play equipment in that park, but there is this place where there aren't. And, you know, I can tell you they were all in there. And that's my view. And I think also I like these natural play areas, you know, that are all about sand, and which we had Helen at Rochester in our strategy there. So that approach would be more the way I would go. And I haven't done many play areas. It's not particularly what I do specialise in. So.
Doesn't stop you having a view, however.
No.
Any other questions for Diana? I think I would just say personally how much I enjoyed that, Diana, but hand you back to Annabelle, if I may. Oh, hang on. There's one more. Sally says, I love your idea that play sculpture can be anything a child imagines it to be. Watch out for Susan Jellicoe's photo of his adventure playgrounds next week.
Oh, yeah.
Your talk, Diana. Yes, we're looking forward to that, Sally. Anybody else? Annabelle, are you there?
I am, indeed. Sorry, I'll come back.
Thank you. I'll disappear.
Okay, Bill. Well, Diana, thank you so much for a really wonderful session. I think, as I said before, I'm so pleased that you're that there's no end to you and no end to what you're prepared to do. I think that's fantastic, and sharing the knowledge that you have. And I think probably writing your book made you, I don't know, understand yourself better, maybe, or your work better.
Yes, it was quite an experience writing that, actually, because you do have to examine. I always, for years, I wanted to do it, but I thought it would be quite painful, actually, because you have to go over all the past and all your, so in a way it's an odd thing to do. But the reason I did it really was the students, actually, and I don't know students, but you don't know who buys these things, but I wanted young landscape architects to actually look at hand drawings, look at the design that was more artistic. That really was the reason for doing it.
Brilliant. Well, and I think you've given with that and with your talks and things just so much back, which is fabulous, really fabulous. And thank you so much for doing this twice now. I hope we can lure you back when you won some more competitions.
Yes.
So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and thank everybody for coming, actually.
Can I ask everyone to unmute themselves and give Diana a round of applause, please?
Yes.
Thank you.